There's a saying that we're all familiar with, or many of us are familiar with. Pride goes before the fall. And many of you might not know that that's actually a proverb from the Bible. Proverbs 16, verse 18. And let's see if we got this going here. Can you guys do the PowerPoint? There we go. We're good. Pride comes before destruction, and an arrogant spirit before a fall. Something we've often read, we think of it, we hear it, but do we actually know what that looks like? I'll tell a story that, this is one of my favorite stories that happened to a friend that I used to work with, a co-worker, many years ago. And some of you have heard this story, just, you can hear it again. He was dealing with Sears at the time. Sears was a store, I think it went out of business like 5-10 years ago maybe. But Sears had an auto zone, kind of like Walmart. You have where you get your tires done, or Costco, your tires. And he bought an automotive part, and he brought it back, and they wouldn't take it back. And he was arguing with them, and he asked to speak to the manager, and I got an escalated, heated argument over it. And finally, he stormed away after giving some choice words. He stormed away, got mad, and he got into his car, and he pulled up in front of the garage, and he held the brake down. Now, in that day and age, the cars were rear-wheel drive, most of them. And so since your front brakes have most of the braking powers, like 75 to 80% braking power, if you touched your brake, the front brakes would lock, and the back ones, if you stepped on the gas, you had enough horsepower, you could spin the tires. You could stay in one spot. It's called a brake stand. You could stay in one spot just spinning the tires, and that's what he did. And he just spun the tires until they made smoke, and it would go into that garage, and he was all mad at them, shaking his fist until all of a sudden, boom, one of his tires popped. And away he just kind of wobbled a few feet away, and there he was, jacking his car up, fixing it in front of all the guys in the shop that he tried to smoke out. And I can't remember if he said he had to go ask to borrow a tool. I can't remember, but I'm sure that would have happened. But there's an example of, a situation where, you're trying to be right, you're doing the right thing. But for many of us, embarrassment doesn't happen like that, because it's never our fault. Some of us don't know what it's like to fall before pride, because, it's not our fault. If he had that attitude, he could have said, I can't believe you guys, you didn't pave your driveway smooth, or your parking lot, or there was a nail that I found. It's never our fault, it's always someone else. And that's the problem with pride. It creeps up pretty quickly. And it's hard for us to see it. C.S. Lewis says a couple of times, a proud man's always looking down. He's looking down at others, and you don't take time to look up and see where you are in your position in life. And pride is like a cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. And so we have to be very careful about pride. It can be used and it can creep up on us, and we can think, if I were to say, how many of us struggle with pride? Very few of us would probably recognize that, to the number of us that actually do maybe struggle with it in one way, in one form or another. There's another story told about a clever salesman who said, let me show you something that several of your neighbors said you couldn't afford. And, oh, really? Let me see what you have to offer. There was actually a study that was done, and this was put out, let me see if I have it there. Yeah, this is a report. This is going back like 8 years now, 2016. And this report said that for every 1,000 that your neighbor won in a lottery, you're 2.5% likely to go bankrupt, the neighbors around them. And you're like, well, how would they know this? And so the study goes on to say that they actually took Canadian statistics, because Canada kept all the stats from 2014 to 2004 to 2014. They looked at postal codes of everyone who had won money. And so they had a way you can go and look at the study, and that's what it's found. Whether it's realistic or not, but I believe it. I believe that there's such a thing as called keeping up with the Joneses, a saying we have. When someone else is doing well, you do whatever you can to try and keep up with them. And we've seen that. And actually, it's a real challenge, especially especially if you're new to Canada, you're coming in and you're seeing how people are living and you want to be there right away. Or if you're young and, you just graduate university and you see how your parents and everything they have and you want to be there right away. You don't realize it, it doesn't happen like that. But some of us, we wrestle with this idea of pride. There was another study I wanted to make reference to. Not a study, another saying that I found quite interesting. But first, before I do, I want us to realize where pride comes from. Do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride in one's possessions is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world with its lusts is passing away, but the one who does the will of God remains forever. And so, the pride in one's possessions. And you have to wonder, some of you have seen this saying going around for the past couple of years. If a monkey hoarded more bananas than it could eat, while most of the other monkeys starved, the scientists would study that monkey to figure out what was wrong with it. But when people do it, when humans do it, we put their picture on the cover of Forbes magazine. Right? And this idea, why? Why do the wealthy that have so much money continue this need to have more? Now, I'm not saying this for all of them. I don't know. Everyone's heart's different. God knows the heart. But I'm sure with some of them, it has to do with money and power and prestige and fame and keeping ahead of those other most wealthy in the world. And I did read an article that suggested that some do that. There's almost like a little competition between the most wealthy. It's not that you need it, but it's this, what does it come from? This underlying root of the problem of pride and how we present ourselves to others and in the world. Peter talks about pride. And Peter says, all of you should clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Because what? And he quotes from the Old Testament. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that he can exalt you. Now, remember, that's Peter writing this. And you know what? John was the one that we read earlier. Do not love the world. So, this is John and Peter, two of the disciples who were with Jesus. And they knew about pride. And here's one occasion, this is where we are in our series this morning, Mark chapter 9, and we're going through the Gospels, looking at them from what they're learning, looking at Jesus, following Jesus through the eyes of the disciples. And here they are, and when they came to Capernaum, when he was in the house, he asked them, this is Jesus asking them, what were you arguing about on the way? But they were silent, because on the way they'd been arguing with one another about who was the greatest. See, they had already learned from Jesus that Jesus wanted them to be humble, to be meek and lowly and humble. And let's see if I have that one. Yeah, I'll just, I'm just going to reference Matthew chapter 5. Verse 5, blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. And in Mark chapter 7, and he said, what comes out of a man is what defiles him, for from within, out of a person's heart, comes evil thoughts, sexual immoralities, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slander, pride. So Jesus had already talked about these things with his disciples. And here they are, and they're arguing about who's the greatest on the way. And so what does Jesus do? Well, we get a little more insight into this through Matthew's account. And Matthew says that at that time they came and asked Jesus, so who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And when you put the two accounts together, it seems they're having this argument. Jesus said, what were you arguing about on the way? And they were afraid to talk about it. And then maybe someone goes to Jesus and says, Jesus, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And then both Mark and Matthew have this account of Jesus bringing a child into his midst. And he called a small child and had to stand among them. Truly I tell you, unless you turn and become like one of these little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. When you think about children, there's no pride. There's no pride. They wear whatever they're given, and they don't judge when it comes to dealing with one another. They kind of go up and they can love all people. I mean, children don't have the same judgments as adults do. And so here's that account in Mark 9. Their argument, who is the greatest. Sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he must be last and servant of all. He took a child, had him stand among them, take him in his arms. He said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but also the one who sent me. And so Jesus points to the attitude of a child when he tries to teach them about humility and pride. This is something Jesus had warned them about. Oh, here's those passages. Okay, so Matthew 5, he warned them. He had already warned them about pride when he says, watch out with what comes out of your heart. And you know what's interesting? Here again, they're arguing about who's the greatest. Jesus teaches them. But a short time later, we see James and John coming to Jesus privately and, Lord, can we sit on your right and your left? Can we have these positions of honor with you? And this is found, Mark talks about this in the next chapter, Mark chapter 10. When the 10 disciples heard, they began to be indignant with James and John. And Jesus called them over and said to them. Now I'm surprised it doesn't say here, Jesus said to them, I already told you. I've been trying to teach you. Haven't you heard what I've been saying all this time? No, Jesus was patient. And Jesus says, you know that those who are regarded rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. In high positions, they act as tyrants over them, but it is not so among you. Actually, or on the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you will be slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Even the Lord, who could have come as king, the way that kings live in this world, he could have come into a nice home, into comfort, into fame, into fortune. He didn't. He was born in a manger. He was born to a poor family. He ended up on the run after his birth. And these are things people are going to be thinking about in the next couple of weeks as we think about the story of Christ coming into this world. And this is what he said. He didn't come to be served. He came to perform a mission, and that is to serve us. And he calls us to do the same. Go into this world and serve others. And you can't serve others when you're always looking down at those who need to serve you. And so be careful with our pride, because pride doesn't work with service. Unfortunately, they still didn't get it. So Jesus talked to them over and over, and here he is. He's about to leave this world. He's at the Last Supper, the day before he leaves. And a dispute arose among them about who should be considered the greatest. This is at the Last Supper. And they're still fighting about who should be the greatest. Now, Jesus could have said, listen, you need to do this. You need to, I told you this already. And he says, for who is greater, the one at the table or the one who is serving? Isn't it the one at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. And with this, what did Jesus do? Because they wouldn't wash each other's feet, Jesus took a towel, wrapped it around himself, and got down and washed their feet. I am among you as one who serves. I am here as a servant, and I have called you to do the same. And this is a real challenge for us as Christians. It's a real challenge for us, and it's a challenge for us as humans. Because as humans, we like to feel good. We like it when people look up to us. We like it when people praise us. We like it when we present ourselves in such a way that, really people treat us special. But God warns us. And God has been warning us for a long time. When you think about the warnings in the Bible, think about the people who have fallen because of their pride. Even Adam and Eve, who wanted to be like God. And they wouldn't accept that it was their fault. Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. Don't take our own responsibility. No way, that's not my fault. Cain and Abel. There's Cain killing his brother Abel. Maybe some jealousy there. Maybe a little bit of pride mixed in. Nabal, for sure. Here is David asking for some sheep. Who is David? He's so wealthy, and yet he brushes off the next king of Israel. Naaman, who comes from Assyria, and he almost lives and dies with leprosy because he was too proud to wash in this little river and just dip 7 times in this little dirty river. Why would I do that? Pride almost kept him and was almost his fall. But it was the fall of Uzziah, the king, who he was so proud that he was doing so well in his relationship with God. He thought that he could do the priestly duties. And so as he got mad at the priests and was yelling at them, his hand shriveled up. Remember Uzziah? And it was his pride that was his downfall. And of course, even the good King Hezekiah, who had all these riches, and when the Babylonian, emissaries from Babylon came over, he showed them all of his wealth. And the pride was his downfall. Or Josiah, who thought he could step in the way between the armies of Assyria and Egypt, and that was his downfall. And should we go on to talk about Saul or Samson or Goliath, Nebuchadnezzar, the opponents of Paul in the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira? Is this the amount of money you got for what you sold? Yes, it was. There's that sense of pride that could have been in the background with them and their downfall. And of course, here's another one, the grandson of Herod the Great. In Acts chapter 12, it's recorded that he was there addressing the people. And we read that on the appointed day, he was dressed in his royal robes, seated on the throne, and he delivered the speech. The assembled people began to shout, "It's the voice of a God and not a man." And because he didn't give credit to God, didn't say, "I'm not a God, there's one God," God struck him with worms and he died. And it's been recorded in other books outside of the Bible, and people now, physicians look at that and they believe that because of the description of what he went through, that he had a kidney disease that was complicated by an uncomfortable case of maggot-infested gangrene. That's what people, all the descriptions, like, yeah, that's how he died. And the Bible tells us how he got that. And so, pride comes before the fall. God does not like pride. Be very careful. James reminds us, just as Peter had quoted, James says, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. He quotes that. Proverbs 6:16. The Lord hates six things, in fact, 7 that are detestable to him. And the first thing is arrogant eyes, a proud look, a proud heart. Proverbs 16, verse 5. Everyone with a proud heart is detestable to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished. And Proverbs 8:13. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate arrogant pride, evil conduct, and perverse speech. Again, reiterating the things that God hates. And there's many more. These are just a few. There's like a child who builds a tower and thinks he's so good. Look at how high I built this tower. Look at how good I am at this. None of the other kids can build the tower that high, but you as the teacher or the adult's like, yeah, that's great, but that's not a tall tower. Right? We know what a tall tower is. It's not the building blocks that's taller than the little boy or little girl who's building them. And from God's perspective, when we think we are so high and mighty, and God looks down and thinks, who gave you all that? Who do you think you are? We are just a speck in the cosmos. We are so small and insignificant in size, but yet, to the Lord, when we do what's right, we are called in as his children. And so be careful of pride. And what does that look like today? Someone described pride as the excess preoccupation with self and one's own importance, or one's own achievements, or one's own status or possessions. Well, often when we think of pride, we think of maybe one of these things. But pride can be all kinds, and I just want to make sure I caution this. Just because one of these things, someone has it, doesn't mean they have pride. Okay? So it's also a heart attitude. So be careful. Because someone, they could be very proud of their looks. And they could spend a ton of time and energy and money on their looks. And they're full of pride because of their looks. But maybe they're not. Maybe they just have a lot of looks and it has nothing to do with the proud heart. God just blessed them with looks and it just comes naturally and they don't work at it. So we got to be careful. Maybe it's money. Maybe someone's worked so hard for money and they're proud of their money and they show it and they want you to know it. Maybe they just got money. Maybe they're using it humbly. Maybe they have a plan for their money to use it, to be able to give it and use it for kingdom work. So be careful that just because someone has one of these or looks a particular way doesn't mean that they're full of pride with it. But you will know. We have to judge ourselves. Are you proud of your money? Are you driving a particular car, or do you have a particular house, and are you presenting yourself? Is it causing you a bit of pride? And maybe you're not doing it out of pride, but maybe it makes you become proud. You know, I've seen that happen. You know, I enjoyed cars. I enjoyed the feel of old muscle cars when I had them. They felt good. I loved it. I could drive it in the wilderness by myself, you know, all day. I loved it. But when I was in town, you know, once I got pulled over by a police officer. I said, what did I do now? Nothing. I just want to look at this car. This is awesome. And I was like, don't do that. That scared me, you know. So, I mean, you know, but then all kinds of people were like, you know, you want to be your friend, and you're like, you know, you get a bit of a chip on your shoulder sometimes. You have to be careful. You're not all of a sudden driving around thinking you are somebody you're not. We do that. Maybe it's with our health. Some people do that. I see some people, you know, that they're all about their looks. And the first sign of the sun, you know, and for some guys, you know, I see that some, you know, especially students, some of them, you know, that the gym working hard all winter, the first sign they'll take off their shirt. It's like, it's 2 degrees, it's above zero. So, you know, you're showing off what you've accomplished, you know. And what about our achievements? What about talking about ourselves? Because sometimes pride it goes away like, you know, maybe it's about things people don't know. It's something you've done. And so you're always telling something you've done in life. Oh, did you hear about me? You know, I was in such and such, or I did such and such. And you're always talking about yourselves, and you're trying to get people to think better of you. Maybe you're criticizing others. It's not just talking about yourselves. Maybe you're pulling others down and to lift yourself up. So maybe it's just criticizing others. Maybe you're unwilling to apologize. You know, it's never my fault. Because you don't want to look wrong, you don't want to look bad, you don't want to look weak. And so maybe you get easily offended. And you won't take criticism. You know, because of your pride. Someone made me look bad. There's people who've left the church because someone embarrassed them in front of the church. I'm never going back. I've been embarrassed. How dare you do that? Maybe they didn't do it intentionally. Maybe someone's unwilling to serve in a particular situation. That's beneath me. I don't do that. Because it's going to make you look bad. Or maybe you only want to do things that make you look good, so people will see you and praise you. You only want to be in the spotlight, so to speak. Maybe pride peeks its head through envy in our lives. Or refusing advice from people. I don't need advice. I know what I'm doing. Some love the praise of others, as the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And Jesus talks about the tax collector and the Pharisee who, you know, standing out there praying. And Jesus says, God looks at the heart. And some of us, we justify our sin. We get defensive and we justify it because of pride. Well, what should a Christian's life look like in humility? There's a few verses that give us an idea. Before we read these, in addition to what Jesus said, taking a child, you want to know if you're proud? You know, be like a child. If a child doesn't like something, you know, they'll still come back to you and they'll let it go and they'll forget about it over time. not going to harbor something and hate you. Children, they have this attitude of love. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, Paul says, or conceit, but in humility, consider others as more important than yourselves. So do we have that attitude? Do we consider others more important? Or are we fighting and saying, you know what, I need to do this, you're not as important? Or, how's our attitude towards others? Everyone should look not to their own interest, but the interests of others. How can I serve that person? Isn't that what Jesus did? Jesus said, I am among you as one who serves. He should have been served. He should have been the one that we were all waiting on, that we were all just like, what do you want us to do? Doting on him, just giving him whatever. But no, instead, he was the one who was serving us. He was the one who was setting an example for us. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be proud. Instead, be willing to associate with the humble. How many times are you seen with someone who's maybe got some problems in life? Maybe they're embarrassing you. You're like, I'm not going out with that person. They're going to embarrass me. I'm not going to invite them to the movie. Man, they talk real loud, or they might do something really embarrassing. Or I'm not going to take them out for dinner. No way. I'm not. Right? Well, who will if Christians won't? Who will? If the people who are supposed to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth, if we're not doing that, if we're not associating with certain individuals in this culture who are very difficult, who will? And remember what Jesus said. In these passages, when he takes those children, Jesus reminds us that he came to give his life, that he was among us as a servant, and we have to be like children with our attitude. There was a grandfather who once said to his grandson, he said, son, there's two wolves that live in all of us. He said, one represents pride, selfishness, and arrogance, and the other represents humility, kindness, and selflessness. And the grandson said, Grandpa, well, which wolf will win? And the grandpa said, whichever wolf you feed. May we continue to be in God's word and remember the life of Jesus. Live a life of humility. Remember that those apostles who wrestled with it, even the 12, watching Jesus for 3 years, following him for 3 years, having him give us any sermon that I give, hopefully you hear God's words. But if Jesus was right here this morning teaching all of us as he taught them, it would still be difficult. And I know that because those 12 wrestled with it for 3 years. So if they wrestled with it for 3 years after hearing it from the mouth of Jesus, we need to be very, very cautious and work hard to make sure that we're living humble lives, giving glory to God, walking humbly before our God, and giving him the praise that's due to him. Let's stand for our final hymn.